Hello, everybody. We are back. This is Media Cyphers, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. Section of the program. Going to join by my co-host Nora. Nora, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. How about yourself?
Doing pretty good. Yeah, so we're recording this ahead of time, but supposed I'll be in the new studio this afternoon. The Bronco Bash is going on, so hopefully we get a nice little introduction to the wider public about kind of what the show is all about. And with that, we've got a couple of really important issues that we're going to dive into. We're going to talk about organized labor. We're going to have a deeper discussion about some of the anti-trans hate crimes have been popping off, and again, how they're linked
And
to
racist hate crimes. We got
and
a little bit of
racist hate
both
crimes.
today.
Yeah, that's true. Um, and but we're going to start off where kind of talking about the rot at the core of American capitalism here. The Republican primary debate was last week. I read the transcript. I could, which is bless the people who wrote those transcripts and made them available. That way, I didn't have to listen to Ron DeSantis or any of the other ones. Um, but yeah, I think I'll start off with a quote from the World Socialist website before we kind of get in and dissect this. Um, but in their coverage of it, they wrote this paragraph that I think kind of sums things up for all of us lefties and socialists out there. It is pointless to analyze the debate as though it was an exchange of political views or an exploration of policy differences. To one degree or another, all the candidates conform to the Trump playbook based on one of the few books he has read, the speeches of Adolf Hitler. Fascist demagogy reframed for American circumstances with a mixture of religious fundamentalism, anti immigrant nativism, and anti intellectual backwardness. And yeah, all of those things were pretty much on display at this debate. Although there were some interesting omissions and observations that I think are also worth talking about. So I kind of made just like a list of kind of observations going through the debate. Maybe we can kind of like ping pong back and forth. Um, I think I'll start off by this is more of an interesting cultural observation, but so they started off the debate referencing that song that's gone viral, Richmond, north of Richmond, and they kind of all framed it around like this is an obvious conservative song, and we're gonna fight it. And I bring it up because it kind of exposes the faux populism that is on at the heart of most of the people who were on the stage that night. Because the artist who made that song, and I'm forgetting their name, um, but if you haven't heard it, it starts out talking about like, oh, poor people, workers are oppressed. There's these Richmond, north of Richmond, which is referring to Washington D.C. But then it subsequently punches down on people on welfare, kind of like saying
And
back
plus
to the
size people.
and plus size people. So kind of referring back to those old, more conservative reactionary talking points about like people, taking our dollars from the welfare system, which worth bringing up, most of the welfare and food stamp money from the federal budget goes to Republican states. So, but I mean, most of us know that. But what's interesting is the artist after the debate actually went on, I don't know, it was TikTok or social media, and basically bucked up against the idea of those people embracing a song. Now,
Exactly. Like,
yeah,
yeah, he said that diversity is good. He said that like the people embracing his song are a lot of the same political leaders he was rambling against. Because, like, for example, we know that Donald Trump was also like on Epstein's plane. The song it does also reference like that whole Epstein Island thing. And it is still really bizarre of him to also go after welfare recipients and plus size people when he himself is a bigger boy. But like it's like a really it seems like really weird triangulation, but like I think it's evident that he's not fully in the conservative camp. Otherwise, he would like double down on this, or he'd even like just sell out his whatever morals he might have to double down on that message and get the bag, so to speak.
Yeah, it kind of it reminds me of those kind of confused class politics that a lot of people have when, they innately understand that we're being oppressed by the ruling class, but we've also been inundated with decades and decades of this anti-working class, anti-poor propaganda. So I mean, his politics, his class consciousness is a little confused, but he's at least aware enough to understand that these elites up on the Republican debate stage are trying to, use his song to posture as these oh, what's up, fellow workers, yeah. Which is it's what all of these candidates are in a ways trying to do, trying to kind of recatch the the lightning in the bottle from the Trump administration that appealed so much to mostly kind of bougie middle class people who think they're part of the working class.
I mean,
Uh,
it's kind of like that. I feel like a lot of what we saw on like the debate stage was kind of like Trumpism without Trump in a certain sense, in which there was still a lot of discussions of like non-Trump like kind of Republican talking points about balancing the budget, aka cutting social spending, which by the way, Trump himself almost never talked about. Like I think very few voters these days even care about like that whole talking point to begin with. But like aside of like think like their populism credentials were very low. In fact, I think the only one of those candidates that came like close to even emulating what Trump had was would be Vivek Ramaswamy, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. I think
mhm.
he was the clear winner of that debate because he sucked up to Trump the most to get. I mean, it's kind of what you have to do if you're like, if he's leading by, massive margins. I don't know what the number is exactly, but it's not even close. Like this debate was really a battle for second, first and foremost. And
Yeah,
but Vivek really like sucked up to Trump in like a big way, really bit a lot of his, I mean, a lot of them were biting his style one way or another. But I think that Vivek did that most convincingly. And the way like I guess Republicans these days think, I feel like that would appeal most to them.
yeah, and I was gonna say too, he probably made the biggest splash on the debate stage, and he seems like he's somebody who's going to, whether he ends up being a running mate for Trump or just in Republican politics, we're probably going to have to deal with that. And for the foreseeable future, it does kind of feel like kind of a synthesis of that sort of conservative faux populist with I mean he's literally a venture capitalist um, with that kind of millennial right wing kind of far right spark, if you want to call it that. Actually, it was funny. I was talking with my fiance about the debate. She kind of referred. It's like he's got like bizarro Andrew Yang vibes, like his evil twin, if you were. Kind of similar way that you have this very like kind of tech centered politician who at the same time is like hedging towards the business world, but also trying to is like, oh, isn't there some third way approach it? But yeah, again, interesting political figure, and we're going to kind of dive a little bit deeper into some of the stuff they talked about second. I thought it was interesting too, you're referring to taxes, is it almost like there was this rhetorical attempt to marry that sort of right-wing fake populism with, again, a lot of these talking points you could have heard from the 2000 debate or the 1996 debate or
Right.
and it's like trying to marry that fake populism with just explicit neoliberal talking points. And we got to talk about the irony of that because, a lot of the stuff they're referring to was part of that neoliberal consensus of the 80s and 90s. I mean, heck, a lot of stuff referred to was pioneered by Bill Clinton, among other people. So it's nothing new, but it's like that those neoliberal policies are the kindling that has kind of brought about many of the tensions that we are observing in the year 2023. Trump was savvy enough to tie a lot of those unpopular policies to the Clinton era. But these folks are trying to speak out of both sides of their mouths. We got to fight for the working class, fight for the middle class, while also going back to policies that has led to this anti-populist moment. So yeah, it's again a very strange shotgun marriage of trying to appeal to this kind of right-wing populist rhetoric while also pointing to policies that in fact kind of created those tensions within the Republican Party in the first place.
Yeah, you're definitely right on that. I do think that one thing that was interesting is like was like, their arguments that they had on like abortion and trans rights, both of which are like, to go after either of those rights are like really unpopular. But they didn't talk about it as much as the state governments have been legislating about it, for example. Like one thing that was really interesting that is that Nikki Haley kind of was talking like a Democrat in the sense that like, oh, we should be putting restrictions, but we don't have the senators for it, which you almost never hear Republicans do. They just find a way to cheat to do it anyways. And Mike Pence talking about how he wants a 15-week ban nationally, which would, of course, be a massive disaster. And but other than that, it didn't come up a whole lot, and nobody really talked about the whole gender thing, like except for like some of the closing statements, which I think just shows their savviness that these issues are like not as popular as they like. But what they say and how they legislate is a different thing. So no matter like who gets in charge, we can expect like a massive hit on you know, trans rights and abortion rights, which are very much tied together.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up because that might have been one of the most interesting aspects of the debate was what wasn't really spoken about, or at least not spoken about um, at length, which is you didn't see a lot of the discussions around quote unquote wokeism that you saw leading up to the midterm elections. And when it was brought up, trans rights, you saw the most of candidates kind of pivot, or at least try to like I think it was maybe it was Nikki Haley, but they kind of tried to like get into a different conversation about education. So yeah, I think some of the stories we reported recent weeks about how according to polling and the results of the last election, these issues have been kind of losers. And I think you saw kind of this tacit acknowledgement of it on the debate stage where they didn't really push those issues in the way they had been. I think there's definitely some political calculus that goes into that as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And but speaking on like the subject of education, one thing that was kind of crazy about this debate is how often they would talk about how they wanted to abolish the Department of Education and go after teachers unions very aggressively and wonder like, oh, our education's in crisis. What do we do? Well, we gotta take more funding from it and go after the teachers unions like their one line of defense. And it's it's a wonder why this is happening in the first place. Because of course a lot of the GOP's recent attacks on education using social issues is like kind of a cover to also like kind of push more of the whole school choice, charter schools, defund public schools, therefore increasing inequality between them. And it's, I mean, like, I guess because of like how egregious a lot of these school related bills are trying to pass is even on just like a social level, it's it's like easy to get lost in the weeds as to like what their eventual goal is. I think one thing that was like also kind of chilling that they were a lot of people were agreeing on is how anti-immigrant they were all are. For example, Ron DeSantis was calling for shooting migrants cold stone dead crossing the border. So like a lot of that kind of fascism there more out in the open.
Yeah, it was interesting to me. It's like, so, they're not the party in power. And, it was interesting how so much of that anti-immigration rhetoric got brought up in response to Ukraine. It's almost like these candidates wanted to feel like they had credibility in criticizing the military industrial complex. But, so the progressive argument with that is often we need to take money out of the military and put it into like social programs, healthcare, et cetera. And their argument is we need to take that money and use it to, garrison the southern border. And yeah, as you mentioned, it basically amounts to a lot of them agreeing with the idea that crossing the border should be a capital offense, which should sound insane to most people. But yeah, they're really just pushing hard, hard, hard on the xenophobia button. And as I don't think our listeners need a reminder, but just to throw it out there, the vast majority of crimes committed, even in areas with high immigrant populations, are committed by U.S. citizens. There's a common sense,
Exactly.
yeah, like the common sense that follows from that is like, again, if you are a non-citizen, you are much more vulnerable to legal prosecution. So, you know, that it just, but yeah, it is kind of leading back into a lot of the scaremongering that we've seen, particularly in 2020. As maybe a potential area they could leverage some of people's innate prejudices in the way that they haven't been able to do quite as successfully against trans and black people. Um, so, uh, kind of, you know, tying into that, um, you know, we did see this kind of strange rhetoric around um, you know, critiquing all the money going to Ukraine, but at the same time also doubling down on this nationalism. We also saw them talking about, you know, both parties in Congress are really um, uh, have this very dangerous Cold War mentality with China. And all the Republicans on the stage just want to like ramp it up to 11 and just fully militarizing our approach to how China should be dealt with. That might be one of the scarier things coming out of that debate. You know, I think nuclear weapons and nuclear war are on people's minds a lot more than they have been. You know, credit to Christopher Nolan partially for that. But
I'm gonna watch that
yeah,
movie today, actually.
oh yeah, it's just a side note, and maybe I'll do a longer episode on it. So I've talked before. I think I've talked before on the show about Christopher Nolan's. I did a whole dissection of the Batman movies. They're very weird and conservative, but Christopher Nolan pleasantly surprised me with this last one. I'll just keep it at that. Uh, very strong. Very strong anti-nuclear message and deals correctly with a lot of the history, particularly a lot of the red baiting that he did with Oppenheimer later after the bomb. But anyway,
I have
so
heard, however, that it doesn't really talk enough about how a lot of like indigenous communities were really harmed under the testing of the atomic bomb in New Mexico. So like, I mean, again, I haven't seen the movie yet. I'm more of a Barbie girl in a Barbie world, but so that's definitely one of the main criticisms I've heard about that one.
yeah, no, that's very true because you just the movie kind of paints it as like just a blank slate of land, which it very much wasn't. And I think I will say too, there is one reference to it, like they're talking about whether or not to keep Los Alamos open, and Oppenheimer's just like, why don't you just give it back to the Indians? And the government people look at him like he just suggested like you know blowing up the moon or something. Um, so there's little pieces there. But yeah, I think it's interesting to me how again broader awareness of how like the global powers still have nukes, and there is that still that danger of something like that happening. And the Republican response to the geopolitical tensions that you know the Biden administration has helped exacerbate in its own way
Hmm.
with the Ukraine-Russia situation is let's just exacerbate a different situation that could lead to nuclear war. Um,
Seriously.
yeah, which I don't know if you need to really do a poll. I think the vast majority of people in this country would be against that. You know,
Right.
so so yeah, it is all about substituting the you know war profiteering from one geopolitical opponent to another, and obviously it doesn't really offer anything new, but I think it is a good a good read on where kind of the Republicans are at as we go into 2024. You know, if they should maintain power in Congress or get the presidency, that this is kind of
Hmm.
where we're going to be going. We're going to ratchet up the Cold War with China and militarize it, which
Right.
would not
And
be
I
good
think
for anyone.
that the whole foreign policy discussion on that debate was another example of how Trump caters his message better to the GOP base than his opponents in the primary might. For example, one of the sections where like Vivek like was like kind of a little bit incoherent, especially in terms of like who might be listening to him, was his foreign policy. He did get a lot of hits on that from other debaters there, and in like for talking about how like we might need to give certain parts of land from Ukraine to Russia in order to end the war, which to be fair might end up being how that war ends in the like ends up coming to a peace or ceasefire if that happens in the first place. So it is possible, but like it went a lot more convoluted than that in a way that a lot of Republican voters wouldn't go with. And whether, as Trump said about Ukraine, I'm going to end it with one phone call. It's going to be a tremendous phone call, and we'll end the war in one phone call, right?
Mhm.
Like, so you really got to keep it simple for a lot of them, and but like you're absolutely right about like them really being hawkish on China as well, and like name dropping Taiwan, as a lot of the military establishment seems to be getting ready to prop that up as the next Ukraine, and while slowly weaning off Ukraine to keep their focus there.
Yeah, exactly. I think one thing I wanted to bring up too was the interesting. So when climate got brought up, and to the credit of the moderators, the way they framed it, I think it's like this is what young people are most concerned about. And what was interesting to me is, I mean, you had Vivek, who he doubled down on climate denial, which is not super surprising at this point.
Right.
But I thought it was interesting to juxtapose with what Nikki Haley had to say. And it basically took the form of a sort of like climate nationalism, which is like acknowledge the climate crisis is real, but we're going to blame China and India, and we need to like, pump up our reserves and stuff. And it almost felt to me like, you know, however Nikki lands in this primary or in Republican politics, this is something that I've been thinking about for a while. Is like there will, I think eventually there will be a pivot of the Republican Party around climate change because it's just getting too hard to deny. Like you just if you, I mean, here in Michigan it was 110 for 2 days,
The
and
irony is not lost
yeah.
on the fact that it was the hottest day in Milwaukee on record while they were having the Milwaukee debate.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So it's kind of like, is this a preview of where the Republican Party might end up going on climate? To acknowledge it, but embrace sort of climate nationalism. There's a lot of concern about the rise of eco-fascism among some of kind of the younger far rights, who their solution to the climate crisis is, again, more militarization of the border and punching down on poor people. We started at the top of the show criticizing that Richmond song about, welfare, people on welfare. I think we might see a form of that emerge where it's like Republicans will start blaming poor people for the climate crisis. But yeah, we're already seeing some kind of start to see, and I don't know if that was more Nikki kind of just throwing something out and seeing where it lands, but this idea of like blaming other countries and also finding a way perhaps to blame the workers and unions and stuff for the climate crisis.
My prediction for how the Republicans will handle the climate crisis moving forward, if they decide to acknowledge it, is I think they will like kind of also embrace the eco-fascist wing of their party, in the sense that like, okay, now climate change is already destroying us. Now, how do we get to decide who survives? And that's something that's really scary to me.
Oh yeah, and that's something that should really be front and center of the mind of people here in Michigan. And I know you're in Chicago, but similar dynamic. We've got access to some of the biggest freshwater reserves in the world, and most climate scientists are positing that our area is going to be something of a Goldilocks zone once places are becoming more uninhabitable. So we are really going to start seeing a lot of profiteers. Some of the worst parts of like real estate capitalism make themselves known once it becomes more and
It's
more
already starting to
obvious.
happen. Like a lot of land and buildings in like the upper Midwest are starting to get bought off and developed because of this.
Hmm. So yeah, it definitely serves to pay a close eye on. It's not a big part of the Republican Party now, but I think it's going to come to dominate it in the coming decades. this eco-fascist tendency, and especially how working people are going to hold on in the face of kind of disaster gentrification. We're seeing this play out in Hawaii right now, and it's not absurd to think that we could see a version of that play out here in the Michigan, the Great Lakes region. Um, so, yeah,
Something
something.
similar happened in Puerto Rico back when the hurricane was hitting there.
Yeah, exactly. Um, so I don't have a ton of other stuff to touch on this debate. Um, I don't know. Any other parting thoughts, Nora, before we move to a different topic?
I do want to say a couple things. First of all, I forgot to mention that like Ron DeSantis like was among other them Republicans were mentioning like using military at the border, but like also specifically putting the military in Mexico, which would essentially be an invasion of one of our like closest neighbors and allies, which would also be a huge disaster. Um, the fact that like 8 out of 10, 6 out of 8 of the candidates vowed to back Trump as party's nominee, even if he is convicted. I think but the funniest part about this is how low all of them are doing in the polls in comparison to Trump. There's no situation I see in which any of them become like the nominee unless Trump gets fully barred from running from office. And like if he gets fully convicted for the January 6th insurrection specifically, then that's most likely what will be the cause of it. However, I don't think the Democrats see that as advantageous. I think they want somebody easy to run against again, which is probably why they'll allow this that fascist to continue going on. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
you point to something really important, and um, I think Ralph Nader did a really good breakdown of this on Democracy Now. But they could have explicitly tried to invoke the Insurrection Act against Trump, which would have barred him from office. But none of the indictments thus far, particularly the federal ones, really mention this. And again, history of that it's basically a Klan Act. It was designed to prevent political intimidation of black electorates by hate groups like the Klan. Um, and the interesting thing about that to me is you have this party that we should not forget back in 2020 deliberately like suggested to their allies in the media to elevate Donald Trump as an opponent to run against because they thought he'd be somebody easy for Hillary Clinton to beat. And you're seeing this uh, dynamic emerge in a very dangerous way. Seen this in various midterms here in Michigan. That's part of the reason why Peter Meyer is no longer in office. Is that the Democratic Party literally gave money to their Republican primary opponent because they were more far right and easy to beat. And that particular gamble, did pay off for them. But it is again very dangerous to see them playing with the same sort of fire with somebody who is literally trying to overthrow the government.
absolutely. And like, Michigan is one of the places where they're like, Trump is under investigation for the whole fake elector scheme. It wasn't just the January 6th. He was still actively trying to push a coup through the United States to keep himself in office. That's can't be overstated, which is part of why it is necessary that he is in Atlanta. And we finally got that sweet, sweet mugshot that we've all been waiting for.
Yeah, yeah. The torrent of memes. Those have been.
For what it's worth, I do think it would make an excellent album cover.
Yeah, it's a Trump work, something like that. Okay, so with that, a couple of articles. Check out Democracy Now! Did some really good coverage of this, and as I quoted from earlier, World Socialist website also was pretty succinct in their kind of taking a lefty socialist analysis of the debate. So I point our listeners to those if you want to engage with the debate anymore.
I
With
would
that,
also recommend Hassan Abi's video on it on YouTube. If you want to like kind of also laugh at how much of how much of these guys are goobers. That's also a great way to go about it
Yeah.
with lefty analysis.
Mhm. Absolutely. Okay, so the next couple of stories. So I guess like, do we want to start with some good news or bad news? It's
Let's start with some good news.
okay. Yeah, we need a slight break. So, um, there's a full article on this from Truth Out. I would recommend people check out, but I'm just going to bring up. So there was a victory for workers who are trying to unionize. This is handed down by the National Labor Relations Board. But this is a pretty big deal. And basically, what it would do it forces an employer to recognize and bargain with a union if a majority of workers have previously requested a union and the company had broken labor laws that would require setting aside the results of a subsequent election. And it's basically a little historical context. It's kind of a watered down version of the Joy Silk doctrine. And what that specifies is that if a majority of workers have indicated their support for the union, employers are forced to recognize the union unless they have good faith doubt about the support. But it differs in that if the union has majority support, an employer can still request a union election or a form known as an art petition, and is not required to recognize the union at that point. But I think one of the big things, the big victories here is, especially if you can prove that the company has broken labor laws, because 9 times out of 10 these unions can't form because the company is engaging in anti-union busting activity, which often is illegal or has a legal gray area. Good example of this when Amazon workers were unionizing in Bessemer, Alabama. I think it was Bessemer. I'm sorry.
It was
I'm
actually.
okay. I mixed up my Alabama cities in the last episode, so I'm not really conscious about it. So uh, so yeah, when they tried to organize Bessemer, Amazon engaged in a lot of crappy union busting tactics, and they ended up losing that particular election in slim margin. But they were able to go back and do it again. But the idea is if a company like Amazon were to try to do stuff like that in the future, it would basically be a mulligan for the union organizers. Say, okay, our union is recognized because you engage in this illegal activity to stop it, and this is really good news. Especially we've seen people right here in the city of Kalamazoo trying to start these new unions and buck up against intimidation from their employer. And this may make it much easier for people in the future to organize unions and to help strengthen the strike wave that we've been seeing in the last couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this union decision will be especially beneficial to this NLRB decision will be especially beneficial to the Starbucks union effort, which a lot of the illegal union busting activities have been, really like aggressively and desperately pushed down by Starbucks management. So it's really interesting to see how that'll move going forward. But it's also really inspiring seeing how much of a wide range of like sectors is covered. Like we've already talked about UPS and SAG-AFTRA and WGA strikers, but now we even have a strip club unionized in SoCal. We have and like for mostly here in Michigan, US auto workers have voted 97% for a strike authorization to like push back against the whole two-tiered system of pay, which is very similar to what UPS has had, and like kind of.
That's also something that the Kellogg's workers were striking against a couple years ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but yeah. So I didn't mean to cut you off there. Just
No, no, go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, the two-tiered system, we see this come up time and time again. And that in itself, one of the reasons employers want to hold on to that so tightly is it is a way to kind of pit workers against one another. Uh, but what we're seeing more and more is that workers are kind of reading through the lines of that, and they're not letting their solidarity is being prioritized. Uh, just the U of M grad student strike is officially participating because they've reached an agreement with administration, but they've said that they're going to keep fighting because there some of those pay disparities are still intact. Which again, I think all criticisms can be made about what gains or losses were made by a particular union, but that is in its own way a win that we've gained something. We're from a point where the grad students at U of M and their union have understood they can win things when they agitate. Hopefully, they can keep working on getting the rest of their demands met. Um, but yeah, that was another thing. It crops up everywhere from manufacturing to education. It's the way you kind of try to segregate your workforce based on pay tiers, and that's probably been one of the big lessons of some of the recent strike waves. The way that workers really are uniting and not letting themselves be pit against each other.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely also really kind of illuminating to how the ruling class has been dividing workers with these whole different pay tier system in order to like have another excuse to not pay a lot of their workers as much or use whole similar gig economy tactics for jobs that should be union automatically and not gig economy. But I think the fact that a lot of workers are willing to extend their solidarity and push back at that is really something inspiring to see.
Yeah, and just a quick note. So the strip club that organized that's out in North Hollywood, and I think that's a cool example of industries you wouldn't necessarily think of a lot of strong union activity stepping up and trying to organize in ways that the industry has typically not necessarily done before. And it's actually kind of associated. They ended up organizing with the Actors Equity Association, so it is even kind of tied up in some of these broader entertainment industry strikes. And this is a fun note. This isn't really like deep analysis or something, but I just thought this was cool. Tom Morello actually showed up the night of the successful union and played some music at the strip club.
Oh, no
Yeah,
way.
yeah,
Yeah, that's one thing that's also been interesting, seeing
yeah,
like what kind of like music artists will show up
yeah.
to these picket lines, especially in Hollywood where you have a lot of celebrities would live in the first place.
Mhm.
And one thing I found kind of funny is that well, props to Imagine Dragons for performing for them, although a lot of people joked that it was a strike breaking tactic.
Haven't these workers been through enough? No, no. Sorry. But yeah, yeah. So yeah, again, the strike wave continues, and I think what we're seeing in some of these stories too, though, is kind of the friction between the rank and file workers and some people in the union bureaucracy that and if you read different covers from different leftist websites, and I'm thinking kind of a little bit of the World Socialist website, they always are kind of like presenting, and to their credit, they present the full picture. But it's always kind of like punching down. It's like this wasn't a real victory because they didn't get all their demands met and the labor bureaucracy and stuff. And but I think it like a more I think kind of useful way to understand that is you have a lot of these union bureaucracies with older leadership that kind of are veterans of the Clinton and Obama years, and this energy that is coming up. When you're talking about Starbucks Workers United, or millennials and Gen Z organizing the workplace, really heralds back more to the heyday of labor organizing that you saw in the 20s and 30s. So there is this big friction between a lot of like big union leadership who are used to being kind of the negotiator between
Mm,
their workers and the bosses versus this more militant strain in the rank and file that are willing to engage in more radical tactics, wildcat strikes, et cetera, in
right.
order to get their demands met. And I think this friction is going to play out, especially in some of the more well-established unions like the UAW. It's one of the reasons. So, if you contrast it with like the new emerging Amazon union that is explicitly worker-centered and explicitly leftist, I forget his name, but
Chris Smalls?
Chris Smalls, yeah, Chris Smalls
Yeah, from New York.
recently traveled down to Cuba and is engaging in this kind of international solidarity workers politics we haven't seen in a long time.
Mm.
But I think it also something going on right now is that friction between some of the old union brass and some of these younger workers coming up who've maybe read their labor history and are reaching a little higher than just getting some of these smaller concessions.
Yeah, it's definitely something interesting to see, and I really hope that we continue to see a lot more unions, a lot of more unions forming, a lot more strikes being at least threatened in order to give the workers the goods. I hope we can get like a general strike at some point for the sake of you know, making some more like long-term policy changes for our country. But because considering how powerful the UPS strike would have been that they narrowly averted, that it could have even been potentially possible, even if the media would have massively turned on them more than usual.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think you see that also like last year's almost rail strike.
Right.
I'm sure Joe Biden, who likes to trumpet himself as the most pro-union president ever, he was probably he did not want to be put in the position where he had to really show his butt and crush the worker strike. But he is the president of America's ruling class, so he necessarily had to. And it yeah, it kind of it shows that kind of friction too is you really see the ruling class expose itself when they're threatened with strikes of that magnitude that really could like put the thumb screws into um, American capitalism to get these concessions. Trains and
I think
trucks
another good example
runs
of
our
this
economy.
was Bob Iger at Disney, openly saying, "Oh yeah, we're gonna wait out the strike until people start losing their houses." Like,
Yeah. Mm.
and the fact that that's not going to work because with the whole new streaming area and the new pay structure that like massively underpays people, it's like they're already making like pennies up to the dollar. Like they already have second jobs, so that's not even going to work in this case.
Yeah, exactly. All right, I think that's about all I have to talk on our labor stories. Any other thoughts on that before we kind of move to our last topic?
I think we covered everything.
All right. So last thing, so we're going to do another update on what's going on with trans rights and anti-LGBTQ bigotry. And legislatively, you've seen there's some losses and some gains at the legislative level. I believe it was Texas. The stay against their anti-trans law just got overturned. It's bad for trans people in
Yeah, that
Texas.
was
I
by the
think.
courts,
Yeah.
as
Uh,
well as like one of the stays in hold on, it was like a cut like one or two of the circuit courts that like had an unfavorable rulings. That was something really upsetting to see.
yeah, and I believe it was okay, I can't remember which state. There was at least one state recently where a stay was put into effect, which is at least buys some time for organizers on the ground. Um, but we've also seen a recent uh, proliferation of hate crimes that have popped up. And again, I think we really need to emphasize the way that the media has kind of portrayed these people as these sort of bigoted lone wolves. But all of these people were primed in their own ways to engage in violent actions against the LGBTQ community.
So the 11th Circuit Court overturned a ban on healthcare for transgender minors in Alabama specifically. So that could have let's see, like a day earlier, a federal judge in Georgia temporarily blocked parts of their own state ban. But the court's ruling in the Alabama case, now, I should mention, also uses similar language to Dobbs v. Jackson in terms of overturning abortion, arguing how deeply rooted in this nation's history and traditions, which is very concerning because, like, with these competing, like using that language specifically and these competing court cases, it seems like what they're going to try to do is get this up to the Supreme Court, in which which is completely run by fascists. Let's keep it real. So we
Mhm.
can't like trust them to do the right thing, like almost ever, and it's very very upsetting stuff to see, as well as new laws coming into effect in different states mandating forced detransition of any incarcerated trans people in Missouri, for example. So a lot of things still things are still mostly getting bad for trans rights. That's like, shouldn't come as too much of a surprise. But and it's also like evident that we can't like fully rely on the courts to protect us, you know?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I wanted to, if you want to talk about, so there was the um, Lake Arrowhead this is over by California. There was a shooting, and it's also there's recently somebody was shot outside of their store for flying this LGBTQ flag. Um, I don't know if you wanted to reference that, or I know there's an article you sent. Did you want to talk about that a little bit, Nora? You want me to read from it?
Yeah, there's like, but the point is there's a direct line between these policies and this kind of propaganda being pushed and the violence that's being enacted towards these communities. Like there was also like a queerphobic attack in Minneapolis, for example. And also in Minneapolis, one of the cops who aided the killing of George Floyd was sentenced to 5 years in prison, while meanwhile, there's another racist hate crime attack in Jacksonville, which a lot of these like these fascist politicians and news outlets are their rhetoric can be trying to draw a direct line to these. For example, Ron DeSantis gave a speech about the killing in Jacksonville and got booed like massively. And one heckler shouted, "Your policies led to this," and he's absolutely correct.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the Minneapolis case, I think, is interesting because they're talking about kind of the slow pace that under which they're finding the people responsible. And you know, uh, again, one could posit like criminal justice resources are allocated in very deliberate ways. There's that. We had a story a while ago. Somebody who was identified from a street camera for like shoplifting or vandalizing a cop car. They were able to find, yeah, it was vandalization of a cop car, and they were found pretty quickly using the police department's resources. But a couple of people who instigated violence at a DIY show, was, you know, uh, very queer centric. Oh yeah, we can't find these people. Oh no, our resources are stretched so thin. Um, so it kind of goes back to the way that justice is doled out in a very selective way by people like the Minneapolis police force, and also the way in the media. I guess also around the same time there was a shooting of a police officer, and it just completely ate up the news cycle there in Minneapolis. While this almost mass shooting uh, or this no, sorry, this mass shooting in Minneapolis got very little attention.
Yeah, absolutely. When it first happened, it took me a while to even find like any coverage of like that shooting just on like just kind of like Googling around. And even the ones I did like were really insufficient in terms of like reporting the causes and like what led to it and the inaction of the cops. And it all really ties together. Although thankfully them.us was able to give us more details. We found out that part of what most likely was the main reason that this attack was carried out was because some guy was hitting on some queer women at the show and was getting turned down. So it wasn't just a queer phobic attack. It was probably also like an incel type motivation for this one. So that's again draws from very similar ideology of like extreme like misogyny and adherence to horrific gender norms. So
Many of the same like dark corners of the internet.
exactly.
Um, and you look at and again, we need to point the finger properly of who is radicalizing these people, and there's so the article you shared about the shooter in Arrowhead, he he followed, interacted with a lot of the same news pages: James O'Keefe, Jordan Peterson, Matt Walsh, Andy Ngo, Turning Point USA, OAMN, Fox News, Babylon B, Gateway Pundit. Um, and when he was posting, it was all like a lot of these incel ideologies and Nazi imagery. So like these things overlap to the point that they're basically part of the same kind of like hateful ideology that is primarily being spoon-fed into confused young white men. Uh, and the right wing, the Republicans have all these easy bigoted answers for them, and then act all fake surprised when they go out into communities and act upon them. You know,
Yeah, and a lot of these fascist like propagandists will be like, "Oh no, there's a tragedy," and they're immediately blaming me. Like we know exactly, like we have records of like who these people follow, and we know where they come, like their ideology comes
yeah.
from. So there's no real way to deny it, no matter how much they might try to.
It's
And
it's always funny too. They always act like it's a breach of decorum to blame them for speaking about, spreading bigotry online. It's like, how dare you
right.
blame me for doing this? That is just that's beyond the pale. Oh, no, anyway, here's our next story about how trans people are coming for your kids. Yeah,
Yep, well said.
yeah. And yeah, again, we've mentioned this on the show before too, but like especially the whole groomer thing. In one of the pictures from the shooter, he refers to LGBTQ people as LGBTQP, which is again trying to insinuate that the gay community welcomes pedophiles, which obviously it does not. But many of the people that I've just listed, the right wing media demagogues, are saying exactly that, and that is something that can make people like the shooter feel like they have a license to kill gay and trans folk.
Absolutely. That's it's the strategy that they've been employing for the past couple of years now, and they've like they've gone back on it only a little bit because a lot of these same right-wing figureheads are getting called out for also doing some really suspect things with underage people. Like I think the most obvious example is Matt Walsh like having like this rant about how breedable like teenage girls are, something really gross like that. Like and of course the Matt Gates also being an obvious example. Um, yeah, and it's really upsetting to see in terms of the Jacksonville shooting specifically, though, the irony is not lost on me on the fact that this happened on like I believe it's the 60th anniversary of Dr. King's "I Have a Dream" speech. It really illustrates how far we still have yet to go in terms of like even solving the crisis with our racism and violence in this country. And in the Democracy Now! Report, it pointed out like that while Europe is having like it also has a lot of similar problems with racism, they don't have the easy access to guns. So a lot of the hate crimes that might happen there would be a lot more difficult to carry out than they would in the U.S., in which like even if you're on some sort of flag list, you can still buy like an AR-15 at like maybe a gun show or a red state or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with that, we're running kind of close out of time. Do you have any closing comments about this story or anything else we've talked about on the show?
Um, I think like like some like I guess small good news that's kind of related to this is the fact that in Brazil the Supreme Court ruled that anti-queer hate speech is a crime, like now punishable by prison. If we had something like that in the US, which is unthinkable that our Supreme Court would do something like that, it would never get to this, right? Like there's also a lot of anti-queer violence happening in Brazil, which is why this ruling is necessary. And why like free speech should stop hate speech is necessary for a healthy society.
Hmm. Absolutely. Okay, with that, I think we're going to close out the show. Nora, thank you for taking time out of your day to join us on the program. Quick reminder: you can find us online. We're on Facebook. We've got a podcast, Media Cyphers Kalamazoo. You can find that on most podcasting apps. And we are also uploading our content onto our YouTube page. Everybody out there, until next time, thanks for listening and keep on fighting for that revolution solution.